Elliot, but before we get into the book, Five Bullets, about this Bernard Getz shooting, I think we have to really deal with the reality of history in that when we talk about crime in this country,
Yep.
Vigilantes in this country,
Yep.
white people and black people and brown people. The reality is that's American history. So
Yes.
when this happened in 1984, it was no shock, because if you just go through American history, you see this story repeated many, many, many times.
Absolutely, Roland. And moreover, it's not just up until 1984. Let's look at the last, say, 5 or 10 years in the United States. Kyle Rittenhouse in Kenosha, Wisconsin, Daniel Penny in New York City, even Luigi Mangione. And I know that's sort of politically in a different place than the other ones, but these are all people who, for whatever reason, chose to take the law into their hands and were celebrated by a big portion of people in America for different reasons, but were celebrated for doing, quote unquote, what a lot of folks felt needed to be done. And so, nothing's shocking about the Bernard Getz shooting. And nothing will be shocking about the fact that, like you said, vigilantism is who we are as a nation.
Yeah, and listen, black folks are very familiar where where crimes have been committed,
Yep.
where crimes weren't committed. You look at a lot of these lynchings that took place. I saw a video the other day of Henry Fonda talking about growing up in Nebraska and how he witnessed a lynching.
Mm-hmm.
Where they drugged the black man out of jail, hung him up, didn't care what the sheriff had to say, the police chief had to say, and so that angry reaction has always been at the root of when we talk about race in America, and this was no different.
Absolutely, and part of what has animated Bernard Getz, certainly as he led up to the shooting and afterward, I interviewed him for this book, is that he felt those boys had coming to them what they had coming to them. They had criminal records. They had long criminal records, and a couple of them at least one committed really bad crimes after the Bernard Getz shooting. But Getz still sees it. He even reached out to me through a reporter saying, look, if you don't talk about these boys' criminal histories, this story, your book can't possibly be fair. Well, it actually can. The mere fact that someone has done something wrong doesn't entitle anyone to engage in open season on them. And Getz, in his mind, really seems to think that because these boys from the hood in the Bronx had rocky histories, therefore they sort of brought their fate onto them. And that's just a common thinking throughout America. Yeah.
Right, because the reality is, as Getz is on this train, it's not like he had history with his individuals. So what? Was he an oracle? Was he prophetic? Was he sitting there, looking at them and I can read their minds and know their history? No, what he did is he looked at these individuals and made a judgment.
Yes. And let's be clear, and just to back up if there are listeners or viewers who aren't familiar with the story, real quick, Bernard Getz in December 22nd, 1984, boards a downtown New York City subway train, sees 4 black dudes. Now, they were being rowdy. They were doing pull-ups, running around, asking folks for cigarettes and matches and making noise and goofing around, but they didn't hurt anybody. Right. So maybe definitely some of the passengers thought they were a nuisance or a bother to them, but they weren't harming or mugging or robbing anyone. They were on their way downtown to break open video game machines in order to get the coins out of them. Right. But they weren't hurting anybody on the train. Let's be clear. Regardless of what they were on the way to do, they weren't hurting anybody on the train. Getz got on the train. One came up, asked him for $5. Getz immediately thought he was being mugged and then opened fire. Bang, 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 bang. Shot all of them, the 4 of them, with 5 bullets, the title of my book, and leaves one of them brain damaged and paralyzed and the rest of them seriously injured. He knew nothing about their criminal histories. He didn't know that they were going downtown to steal. He didn't know about their drug use. He didn't know any of that. He saw what he saw, felt he was being mugged, and opened fire.
And I was 16 years old when this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think people really understand the visceral reaction. First of all, it takes place in New York City,
Yes.
media capital of the world.
Yes.
And this story, I mean, this is early. I mean, CNN is what, 2-3 years old.
Yeah.
So this isn't like you didn't have a Fox News. There was no MSNBC. There was no social media. But this story went wild.
Bonkers. And Roland, I'll go even further than you. Yeah, you were 16. I was 8. You look good, better than I do, despite that extra 8 years. No, but in that, look, this was formative for me because it's one of the first news story. And I grew up around New York City. I was born in Brooklyn and grew up just outside the city. My dad worked at a department store, Gimbel's, in New York City for most of my childhood, right? And so I knew that subway line. I knew, those streets and the story and the Bronx. My aunt lived there, so I get it. But this is one of my first memories of the news, Roland, really, and shaping how I saw crime and the news and safety and New York City and New Jersey and all of it. And like you said, it was seismic. This took over the world. Now, we didn't have CNN in the sense that we have it today as a sort of 24-hour entity, or Fox or MSNBC for a bunch of time later. What New York did have was tabloids, and it had the Daily News, the New York Post, Newsday, and some smaller ones. And the big one was the New York Post. Rupert Murdoch had just bought it and was shifting it toward crime, scare, and sensation stories. He sort of was a tabloid journalist at the time, or a tabloid media mogul, and really wanted to shift the New York Post into, wow, we're going to make people scared, in effect, because when people are scared, they buy more news, then they get more scared and they buy more news. And when that's their only outlet for taking in, and the headlines are, thugs are here, you're all in danger, the city is burning, it got in people's heads, and it absolutely affected people. I would even say perhaps even more than some of the television stuff we see today.
Yeah. And when we talk about these tabloids, we're talking, I mean, if we go back to the truly wild days of William Randolph Hearst and tabloids, I mean, it was a race. If people don't understand the history of tabloids, especially New York City, it was all about what was salacious, what was the screaming headlines, and yes, the issue of race.
Yes,
that's what defined these tabloids. So if you go back to the late 1800s and early 1900s, you're talking about, you had 20 and 30 plus newspapers that were fighting and vying for the attention of people and the pennies of people. And all of a sudden, yes, when Murdoch comes along, it was, it was literal war. It was, I would dare say, I will call it media warfare.
No doubt.
That was playing out. Who can be the most grimy, the most grisly, the most salacious, the most racist? And in America, this is just very simple. When you put race and crime together, what you are driving is fear.
And, you're hitting every one of the major topics of the book, 5 bullets. So, Roland, so thank you so much. So number one, I have, you mentioned William Randolph Hearst. I have a line in the book about William Randolph Hearst's adage, if it bleeds, it leads. Ultimately,
there you go.
If it bleeds, if it involves violence or scares or crime or whatever else, it'll work as a news story. And I talk about that. I have a whole chapter in the book 5 Bullets about the purchase of the New York Post and everything that did, which was just a few years before the Bernard Getz story, everything that did to just hype New York City up and create an arms race between the Daily News and the New York Post about who can be the scariest and freak people out the most. It's really a big thing and a big sort of part of this book. And crime was the motivator, and, dog whistle racism, because they didn't put black people are out to mug you, but it was a lot of winking and nodding and playing off of the racial fears of people around the city, particularly white folks in outer boroughs. If you know New York City, sort of the outer parts of Queens and Brooklyn and even the Bronx, sort of, Archie Bunker, from All in the Family. He's from Queens, right? And that's the kind of folk that were sort of a big, vocal, politically active community in New York City. And a lot of sort of political action, but also media action was designed to rile those folks up and keep them buying newspapers. And so, and a portion, not a big part of the book, Five Bullets, really gets into why that was and how that helped turbocharge this Bernard Getz story.
And it's also important where not the backdrop, well, it's really the crime scene. You also are talking about at a time when New York City then was not New York City now. When you talk Times Square then did not look like Times Square now. And so you what was feeding this also is a city that was run amok, a city that was seedy, that was grimy, that was nasty, that was on the downfall. And a lot of that language also was a result of white saying, look at this, look at how the city has turned with those people who have come in. And they were talking about Black people, they were talking about Latinos, they were talking about Dominicans, they were talking about Puerto Ricans. That's what they were talking about. And so what you had class warfare, you had race warfare going on. And when these 5 bullets are fired, it was all of a sudden, it was basically a mushroom cloud. And we know with a mushroom cloud, there's fallout far beyond the strike zone. And that's exactly what happened with this Bernie Getz shooting. That was massive fallout that went from New York City to the New York region to America, and yes, around the world.
We'll talk about this being about whether we want to say it was about Black people or not. And it's complicated. Bernard Getz was scared on the train. Look, the homicide rate in New York was anywhere from 1,700 and 2,000 homicides a year, which, look, real talk, that's 4 times or 5 times what the homicide rate is now. Like, y'all who think New York City is all labradoodles and glassy skyscrapers just don't remember the 1980s. It was rough. It was dirty. It was gritty. It was being bailed out by seeking bailouts from the federal government, firing teachers and police officers and sanitation workers, which actually hurt the Black community because so many Black folks were sanitation workers and police officers. So everything was really rough in New York City. Now, about it being about Black people and blaming crime for it, Bernard Getz is kicked off his co-op board at one point a few years before. Y'all, if you got kids here, cover your ears because it's about to get raw. He says, we can't clean this neighborhood up until we get the spics and niggers out. And all of these folks, mixed race folks, hearing said, wait, okay, dude, like, we all care about safety, but that's not cool. And they ultimately kicked him off. That comment, and he doesn't deny it. I interviewed him about it. Like, why'd you say it? What was that about? But for him, he still acknowledged, yes, it's about safety. Yes, the city's rough. We all, Black folks, want safety too. But whether he admits it or not, it's about Black people, at least in part.
And what that means is, I'm thinking about Michael Richards, the comedian.
Oh God!
When he went off on stage, I remember I was on CNN talking about it, and what I said was, if it's not deeply embedded in you, then it can't come out.
Well,
so when he was like, when he goes, I don't know where that came from.
Yeah,
no, actually, you do. It was there. It was present. Now you held it. You controlled it. You were able to turn it on and off. But in that moment on stage, his rage took over and then it all came out. What you're laying out here is for Bernie Getz, that was inside. His racial animus was already inside, built up. Yeah. And so he was just, frankly, waiting for the moment to be able for it to explode out of him and become public.
There's 2 things. One, he had pulled guns on people twice before, once on a white guy, once, I believe, on a Black guy. And it was sort of, he always carried guns and had them on him. So, it was a matter of when, not if, number one. Number 2, on this Michael Richards point, I was saying about my book, but let's just, the Michael Richards, it's really interesting because I heard echoes of the Michael Richards story in interviewing people about Bernie Getz for the book 5 Bullets, because a lot of people, including himself, went right to, that's not who he is. That's not what's in his heart. That's not, who he is. And it's just not that line kept coming up again and again. And when I asked him about it, he said, well, I was high on weed and angel dust that night, and I wasn't really, I was loose. And part of me, and I put this in the book, well, if you're high on weed and angel dust, that's lowering your inhibitions, dude. That's saying what's really on your mind, not making you hallucinate and make things up. And so, yeah, it is who you are. It is who all of us are. And this idea that people get overtaken by passion or fury and start saying things that really aren't them is just not true. I think the first step, Roland, to healing is the admission that, well, look, everybody's got problematic views and behaviors and racism in them. Denying that it's in there, I think it is probably the biggest obstacle to progress to me.
And see, the thing here for African Americans, and this is something that white people, I think for the most part, will never accept, never will understand. That is, we have an antenna. We have been raised to have a racial antenna.
Oh yeah.
And our sixth sense is real clear in terms of judgments made about us.
Oh yeah.
And the thing here for me is their criminal past for me is irrelevant to this particular point. 100%. In this moment, what he does is all he sees are several individuals, and he sees skin color. Oh, I see their actions. This is what they're going to do. Yeah. So I'm ready to fire. And that justification for so many whites at that time, and even present day, it's as I watch what's happening right now with ICE on the streets.
Yeah.
As I watch what's happening, this notion that, oh, you look like a crook. And so for African Americans and others, this moment here, this thing played out in law offices. It played out in engineering firms because it was the presupposition. It was, I have made a judgment about you. I know nothing about you. I know there's nothing, but all I see is this, and you ain't no good.
Of all the people I talked to, the single most measured, believe it or not, many people aren't going to believe this. And a lot of black folks may not believe this, but the most measured person I talked to was Al Sharpton about this shooting. And I know, particularly Sharpton in the 1980s came with a lot of baggage. And I talk about
the large medallion.
The large medallion. I have a whole description of the man and all of that. Right. And I address it. I say, here's the allegations of anti-Semitism. Here's where he was dogged by, ethical questions and so on. But here's what drew many people in the black community to him. Right. And so I'm very fair to Al Sharpton about Al Sharpton. But Sharpton was the most measured about everything. Sharpton and one of the detectives, because Sharpton said to me, look, and he said it back in 1985 too at a press conference. He says, this is not about these boys. If these boys broke the law, I am not here to protect these boys. I am not here to whitewash their criminal records. If they did bad things, they should go to jail too. Sharpton said it. You can check the transcript of the 1985 press conference from Bernie Getz's house. But this isn't about their criminal records. This is about what someone is allowed to do when he purports to be afraid. And if someone is lashing out, if someone is using their racial bias or even just any biases as a pretext for violent crime or a violent act, then he should pay for it. He should go to jail for it. But so Sharpton's one of the few to have taken the tack of, this isn't just a full exoneration or defense of these boys. And I think a lot of people get into that very quickly, that it's like, oh no, the boys are all great. No, this is about, no, it's not about them.
Right.
It's about Bernie Getz.
And it's about Getz. It's about mindset. And it's also about the notion that you have no problem of actually killing somebody. Even though these individuals were not murdered, one was paralyzed. The reality is they could have been. It's called just loss of life. And so when you see this notion of self-defense, I dare say, and I think it goes even this happened before him. But when you start talking about Alec and stand your ground, a lot of that, frankly, is born out of the Bernie Getz mindset
Oh yeah.
Which now we have these stand your ground laws where, oh, I can look at you and make it just, oh, don't,
Yeah.
I now fear for my life. What was always the get out of jail free card for cops, I fear for my life, and now transferred to everybody.
Yeah. So a couple things. I have a chapter in the book, 5 Bullets, that folks should check out about the rise of the NRA. And it's interesting. The NRA really was Boy Scouts and clay shooting with grandpa for most of its existence, for 100, however long it was, up until.
First of all, people have no idea that there now are two NRAs.
Oh yeah.
There's the NRA that has training, things along those lines, what you just described.
Yeah.
Then it's that other NRA that we all know about.
Yeah. And that first NRA was the NRA until about 1977. The organization gets taken over by the activists, and they moved into Second Amendment advocacy and used the Bernie Getz case to their sort of great, they finally had a poster boy. He was perfect for what the NRA said. He's this white guy in glasses, clapping back against the violence and disorder of New York City. This was the guy for them until they realized he was a little bit off. And then they sort of backed away a little bit, but they were really into it. So that's one. And two, Roland, you raised an interesting point about self-defense, and something that I do get into in 5 Bullets is this idea when people, white and black, were suspicious of, this rush to support Bernard Getz, a lot of commentators, white and black ones, said, do people really know what it means to kill? And when you're jumping to support or rushing to support a person who attempted a murder, right? Do you, if you were on that train car, terrified for your life that this guy was going to shoot you too, would you be so in support of this action? Were you the mom of the baby that was in the train car who was scared for her life and her babies and her husband's? Would you have been so supportive of this? It's real easy from our Twitter feeds and our Instagram followers and from behind a laptop to express all this support for violence in the form of self-defense. But do you really know what it means to pull that trigger? And I think people just sort of have that intellectual disconnect where they just forget or just don't want to really realize what it means to shoot someone. And I think we lost some of that. The public lost some of that in the Bernie Getz case.
When we talk about, you just made a point about in terms of African Americans staying on this, and it's always very interesting when we talk about crime. And I have no problem saying this when I watch these white commentators and anchors on television go, well, Roland, I mean, listen, African Americans, they don't want to defund the police. And I'm always having to explain to them that let me be real clear. Black folks say we are constituents. We pay taxes. We want services. We don't want crime. We also don't want our asses beat.
Yeah.
And so in this case here, what you had is, and this is why I think when people try to revert to their history, but you didn't know their history when you fired the gun.
Yeah.
And what black folks say is, I don't want to be on the receiving end of your gun, and then we figure out later if I was a good guy or a bad guy.
Yeah. And I think, to your point, it's, and I found this when I was a prosecutor too. A lot of the folks who were some of the most pro-prosecution jurors were a black brother in overalls or coveralls, or granny who's on her stoop drinking lemonade, who doesn't like the trouble or the disorder, right? It's older black folks who want to feel safe too and don't want crime either. They also don't want their son shot by a rogue police officer. Those two things can be true, that black folks are surprisingly pro public safety to many people and surprisingly almost pro police to many people. But that also doesn't mean that you go through life expecting and just sort of accepting as a cost of doing business that it's okay to get shot by a cop. Both of those things can exist. And I think in black folks' response to the Bernie Getz shooting, including Benjamin Ward, the police chief at the time, was a black man, the first black police chief in New York City history. He said, look, I'm all for public safety, but I'm a black man and I look over my shoulder at night, both for a kid who's going to mug me, but also to make sure a cop doesn't think that I'm here to engage in some badness. And so there's a line in the book, 5 Bullets, being black in America is tough and it's complicated. And I think we all get into that.
You also have, this is 1984.
Yeah.
And I think people also can't look at this as a New York City story, because what you also had going on was the individual sitting in the White House.
Mm-hmm.
And I love when I see these people in social media who go, "It's so much about race today. We didn't have racism in the 1980s," and you're like, where in the hell were you? And so you also had the situation of Reagan in the White House, and the policies of Reagan, the racial policies of Reagan, and this was at the heart of this. How I see this book, and you talk about race, vigilantism, self-defense.
Yep.
But I would say it has to be all caps, 60 font race, because when we talk about race, we're talking about what mental, we're talking about perceptions, we're talking about y'all don't belong here. And that's the thing I think so many people, a lot of our white colleagues don't understand how deep this thing goes when we talk about race and what has been taught, what has been learned, the feelings. And I always say when we have these conversations, race is not racist. And I say, well, that ain't the issue.
It's not, no.
The issue is everything that's in between those two things.
It's, you don't have to be shooting a fire hose with dogs chasing black folks down, shouting the N-word to have done something that was racially suspect or problematic. I'm not going to call it racist, but it's not as simple as people think, black and white, literally. A couple things. So Reagan does come up in the book 5 Bullets a little bit, only to set the stage for, the kind of backdrop and the things that you and I are talking about today, Roland. But a few places where it came up, one, obviously cutting public housing funding and support, which had a drastic impact on black folks in cities in America. 2, this is less Reagan than Congress and the era at the time, but this is right when the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of, I believe, 1986 gets passed and sets the 100-to-1 crack to powder disparity, and overwhelmingly passed Congress. It's not like it was split and, they barely got it through. It's, something, I don't have the vote, but it's like 97-2 or so, up that kind of, maybe not that, but you know what I mean? It was an overwhelming vote in Congress to set that crack powder disparity. And even black politicians thought, wait, crack is different than powder. It's a menace in our communities and we have to do something about it, and overwhelmingly passed Congress. That's 1 and 2. And 3, the best Reagan anecdote, and this is definitely one that I put in the book. The thing that made Reagan pro gun control was seeing black folks with guns, Black Panthers, protesting when he saw the images. And I talk about this in the book.
And they were lawfully, unlike Bernie Getz, they were lawfully carrying weapons.
But something about brothers in berets with and carrying AKs or whatever, or even handguns.
It was long rifles.
Yeah, that's right. They were long guns. They were long guns. On the state house in Sacramento, they protested at a few different state houses in, I guess Tacoma, Washington, Sacramento, wherever else. And Reagan saw them at a protest, marching, and you know what? Let's rethink our gun control policies. And that, for much of his career up until sort of later modern day republicanism, he was a proponent of stricter gun laws.
And I think a lot of people today, because of it being in the news, because of the Netflix documentary, they know about the Exonerated 5, the Central Park 5.
Yes.
But which took place 5 years after this.
Yes.
So if you put those two things together, this really was the precursor. This was like, this was, I hate to say a game, but this was the first half. Then, so for people who now think back to the Central Park 5 case, understand how explosive that was. It had the same setting, the same feel, all the same combustible elements.
Yes.
Of tabloids, race, crime. The difference here was in that case, you had a white woman.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
The Bernie Getz, the Bernard Getz story, this is a white man who's carrying a gun.
Yes.
Woo! When you put a white woman in the equation, We about to go to a whole different level, and
Yeah.
and I think it's important people to understand
Yes,
that
that's a good point,
distinction.
yeah. And you mentioned the two really high profile incidents, the two probably highest profile incidents, Central Park 5 and Bernard Getz. For those who know a little more, little New York City history a little bit deeply, there was like 8 of them year after year after year in New York City. You had Bensonhurst, Crown Heights, Howard Beach, Amadou Diallo, which, when you take out Crown Heights and Amadou Diallo, a bunch of them are literally white guys.
Hold up.
What's up?
Hold up. No. See, you said you had year after year. Okay. So walk through those.
Okay.
What you just described really were mostly incidents where Black people were on the receiving end, and we're not. See, those were deemed at. See, so the moment you said it, those were deemed as racial conflicts.
Yeah.
These were deemed as crime against white people.
That's great point. All I'm saying, why I throw them out merely because New York City in the 1980s was a powder keg when it came to race, and there was constantly some story or another with race as not the backdrop, as the fundamental core thing, whether it's white guys with baseball bats chasing down a Black dude in Bensonhurst, to Amadou Diallo being shot 42 times by police officers for holding his wallet up and thinking it was a firearm, all of them. And it was a constant simmering under the surface of New York that everybody thinks of as this progressive multiracial haven. But New York City was, and I say this having grown up around there, New York City was not racially harmonious in the 1980s.
Hell no.
Don't let anybody tell you that it was.
And you didn't even mention Tawana Brawley.
And I mentioned it in the book.
So you had this, to your point, one after another. But the reason I think these two set apart, it is because how white folks grab this.
Yeah.
Which the things that you described, you had these racial conflicts. And so, did these white kids do this? Did they chase down this Black boy? Did this thing happen? No. This was white folks who, this is an affront to us.
Yeah.
This is us protecting our territory from these savages. That's literally Donald Trump taking that full-page ad out, get the Central Park 5. They deserve the death penalty.
Oh, yeah.
The vicious things that were said about these young men in 5 bullets. It's what they made out as if these were 5 serial killers who were on the loose in New York City,
no doubt,
who deserved to be taken down by this righteous man, Bernie Getz.
No doubt.
That was basically the short view of so many folks.
And there's a quote from Alphonse D'Amato, a longtime senator for New York, the guy Chuck Schumer ultimately ended up beating in 1998. But Alphonse D'Amato saying, we are under siege. We are under attack in this city, and we the city.
And when he said "we,"
who's he talking about? Like he didn't say, but I think the implication was clear. At least the implication was clear, and you're sort of unequivocal about that statement. So, and you use the term savages. That's the kind of language that was used, including at the trial. It's the vultures, the savages, the lowlife,
savages,
the thugs,
animals.
No, they used all of them, several, and I detail some of them in the defense's closing argument. These guys are savages, lowlife, thugs, punks, animals.
And if you go back to Jim Crow America, you go back to post Reconstruction, same language.
Yes.
Used to define Black criminality, whether they actually did it or they didn't do it. You could. Why did you want to venture into this story?
It's a few things. It's like I said, I have personal history with this, having grown up with it. It was a formative story for me. I'm a former prosecutor. I'm a lawyer. I'm a legal analyst at CNN. And I'm talking about legal issues all the time. And I found the legal backdrop of this case fascinating in that, for all the things we've talked about today, Roland, race and crime and fear and what we allow people to do when they're afraid, who's allowed to be afraid and who's allowed to act out on their fears, and what are the consequences when they do, are all things I've thought about for a long time. And it really was a natural fit to me to sort of explore this story after 4 decades, which, few have done, I think, in a comprehensive way. In the immediate, it's how I really landed on Bernie Getz too, is, I was poking around Wikipedia one day and thinking, what's Bernie Getz up to right now? Like what, I hadn't thought about Bernie Getz. And then, we've all been there where you're playing around on the internet and you just end down a rabbit hole. And I thought, I bet we really need to really explore the story in the context of everything we are living with today, with vigilantism, and more than vigilantism, just safety in cities. Like when you see whether it's ICE or National Guard, it's all about how safe people think cities are, right? And weaponizing this idea of safety in cities. That's really what this comes down to. It's not an accident that the National Guard's deployed in big, predominantly Black, predominantly Democratic run cities because of that sort of pervasive fear. And I just feel like the issues that animated 1980s New York and animate us today when we think about public safety are really the big thread running through this book, 5 Bullets, that I wrote.
I ask all authors this question, and I'll pose it to you.
Yes, sir.
And that is, in your writing, in your research, in your interviews, what was the wow moment? What was the thing that caused you to go, oh my God, I can't believe this person said this. I came across this.
There's a couple, but they all come in my interview with Bernard Getz. He said, he said to me when I asked him, so tell me, did you feel you committed a public service when he never used those words. Those were my words, but it was fair to ask the question, do you think you committed a public service? And he said, those guys needed shooting, for starters. That's not why I shot them, but they needed shooting. He had made this moral judgment. And my wife, who was in the next room, she could hear through because I was on speakerphone or whatever, and her jaw, just hearing him say that. And there's other stuff that he said to me too. It's vulgar. I don't know how vulgar you want me to be here, but one of them was pretty vulgar. Some of the things.
Go.
Can I say it?
My show's unfiltered. So no, don't worry about it. Go.
So one was those guys needed shooting. That's why I shot them. That's not why I shot them, but they needed shooting, which was a big one. I would urge everyone to check out my Instagram feed at Elliot Williams Photos. And I have the audio of that in a post from a couple months ago. And it really just, your jaw drops when you hear it because it's very chilling hearing his voice. And I put that in the book. 2, when I asked him, okay, man, you've become one of the most notorious folks in New York City history on account of an action you took with a gun 40 years ago. Do you still carry guns? And he said to me, what kind of question is that? Do you still jerk off? Do you still cheat on your taxes? And I thought, Bernie Getz just asked me, even if he was just not being glib, talking about this masturbation comment was just wild from this man. And it's just that next to last chapter of my book where I detail my conversation with Bernie Getz, it's all wow. It's all, oh my God, is this man really saying these things to a Black man he's never met, but is he really saying these things? And he did.
That is absolutely wild. But again, it goes to state of mind. It goes to exactly who he is. And I think the lesson, the lesson that we have to take from this is, and again, I'm sitting here thinking about this 1984, this particular shooting, what took place, and I'm juxtaposing it with what's happening today.
Yes.
As I laid out in my book, White Fear. The reality is this notion of white fear, has been the defining issue since the end of slavery.
Yeah.
And it permeates in everything that we do, and the judgments, the assumptions, whether you take it out of a subway and take it out of a crime-infested New York City, put it into a college classroom. I wonder if Elliot, did he get in here because of affirmative action?
Mm-hmm.
Does he belong? Is he legitimate to be here? It's there, and for folk who look like us, we know what that feels like.
Yes.
Where we are always having to, frankly, justify being here, justify our place. When I hear Black people talk about imposter syndrome, and so I was talking to a sister yesterday, and she told me, thank you. She said, because you told me something long ago. When I told her that you belong in any room that you walk in. And I gave that as a commencement speech at Jackson State. And the sad thing, the sad thing with this case, with 5 bullets, and what happened with these individuals, is that the perceptions that Bernie gets made, we've all had to deal with. So they may not have been holding a gun, but they could have been holding a pen.
Yep.
They could have been at a bank. They could have been in a convenience store. And so being followed around. So we know this story, even if we were not shot.
You know, Roland, it's funny that you mentioned the affirmative action and all that. And I feel like Roland Martin Unfiltered is the one forum where I can say proudly, right? I have 3 Ivy League degrees. I have been a federal prosecutor, a law clerk to 2 different judges, a daily fixture on a national television network. I wrote a book with a major publisher. And every time I get criticism online, and they come at you online.
Of
people
course.
People don't like whatever people are doing, but everybody's got an axe to grind. The first thing is always you DEI hire.
Always.
After all that, I'm an Eagle Scout, bro. Like literally, I've got, again, I don't say this as a flex, but these are all facts about my background.
Right.
If anybody just took a minute to look at them. And as I mentioned, I come from immigrant parents. My dad worked in a department store for much of when I was a kid. Like I'm not, I got here, right? But the first thing of all, not I don't agree with you, not you're stupid, or not okay, you're too liberal or conservative, whatever. It's you DEI hire. This DEI, it's a noun. This DEI, can you believe what this DEI said on air? And I just, wow, it's you can't shake it, man. You just can't.
First of all, that's going to happen. And what I always say is that's your problem. And my response, I've been asking this time, well, how do you respond? I'll go, they can kiss my ass. See, what I'm not gonna do is not going. I remember we were having a chat. I can't remember if it was a friend chat, family chat, and someone said, we should put billboards up with our credentials. I'm like, that ain't gonna do nothing. I was dealing with I saw some white woman on Twitter. Ketanji Brown Jackson simply is not smart. I'm like, baby, she could run legal rings around your ass on a bad day. And so it is the reality of who we are. And as you were talking about that, I thought about, because I ripped him when he did, David Zurwick, who was a longtime TV critic with the Baltimore Sun. I remember he would trash me when I was on CNN saying I didn't know anything about politics. I remember I sent him an email. I was like, well, that's interesting. Because I didn't know somebody who covered City Hall, who covered county government, state government, federal government, multiple levels, different cities, didn't understand politics. But I know what that judgment is about. Yeah. Because the reality is, there's a view among some whites that again, this is the reason I chose this photo from January 6th. This is a white man with his arms outstretched. What the photo signified for me, all of this is ours. And that's really how this comes out. When I think about this story in 1984 and what was being said, it was a sense of this is ours. Y'all don't belong here. And we're going to defend ours the way we always have done, through violence. Yeah. And that's what it speaks to. Y'all, the book is called 5 Bullets, the story of Bernie Getz, New York's explosive 80s, and the subway vigilante trial that divided the nation. Elliot, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
No, I appreciate you, Roland. Always great to talk. Thanks again.